one can approach the question of Palestine, of historic biblical Palestine, of Israel, from many different angles. I will try and approach it from a few of the key angles, but I want to start with a little bit of history. I am aware that the founding father of Zionism, it's not a religion. I'm from Jewish background. My grandparents were from Lithuania, Latvia. Zionism was not supported by many Jews. It's a political doctrine. Judaism is a different story. It's a religion. Theodor Herzl, man, journalist of Vienna, liked to come up here in the Alps. I don't know the reason. Perhaps there were lots of people around here who were interested. But Theodor Herzl, who founded the Zionist movement not a long time ago, not 2,000 years ago, this thing didn't exist. It was founded in 1896 in a city quite close in Basel. I think that is Switzerland. And that's when they had the first Congress of the Zionist organization. And they were a minority amongst the Jews. You can check all this, Google it, and read the books are better, of course. But Herzl said many things. The early Zionists were very blunt and to the point. And in fact, the later Zionists like Netanyahu and friends like Trump are also very blunt and to the point. In the middle period, the Labour Zionists like Ben Gurion were a little bit more careful, a little bit more diplomatic, but it all amounted to the same thing then, over 125 years nearly ago, as today. Very, very consistent. You look at the sayings and the speeches of every Zionist leader, from Herzl, Jabotinsky, Ben Gurion, Menachem Begin, Moshe Dayan, Ariel Sharon, Netanyahu, Golda Meir, it doesn't matter. They're very consistent. So what did Herzl say that I find so much to the point? I'm going to quote him on two things. Firstly, he went from capital to capital to speak to the kings and the presidents and the prime ministers of the day to get support for the Zionist project. The Ottomans in Constantinople, as it was then called, to Austria, to Paris, Moscow, London, and so on. And he said, support us because when we have this land of Palestine, we will create a wall against Asiatic barbarism. He really knew and understood the European mind and the mind of the rulers. We will create a wall against Asiatic barbarism, which for these rulers, as for him, would start in the Levant, as the Christians always called from the Crusade times, called the area of Lebanon and Palestine. Create the wall there against the masses of darker-skinned people in what we know as the Middle East, further to Asia, the darker people of India, and the yellow people of China, and so on. We will create the war against Asian barbarism. They really like this. Tell us more. What about the people living in Palestine? Because they knew that there were people living in Palestine. It's not like the Zionists came with their myths from 1948 to bring Jews from Europe to the land without people, for a people without land. This was their cry. But already in 1896, of course they knew this was a very fertile land, Palestine. Beautiful vegetation and cultivation from ancient times between the Nile and the Euphrates and up on the highlands, the aquifers, where the olives and the orange trees were growing in such profusion. So, what would happen to the people there if we to build a wall against Asian barbarism so that the Jews would come and live there? He said, to quote, "We will spirit the penniless peasants across the borders into Asia." Spirit. In English, spirit is to quickly move. It's really ethnic cleansing. Spirit away. Rush them away. To spirit people away, you don't just say, here's some money to get on the camel or the train, and we're going to stand and wave you a goodbye. People are cultivating fields. They are creating their artifacts. They are living in the towns, the most ancient towns, which the Canaanites, the forerunners of Palestinians, had built, the earliest civilizations, actually. We will spirit them away. To spirit people away, you need guns. You need force. Otherwise, they're not going to go away. You can be like the Nazis with a force, round them up, put them on the cattle trains, spirit them away to the concentration camps and the gas chambers. In the case of the penniless people of Palestine, across the border, and you can dump them. They can be the responsibility of these Arab kings and sheikhs and feudal lords. Kick them out. And we will make sure they go, because we will spirit them away, we'll use force. This was very clear to the rulers of Europe. Very clear. And one such mighty anti-Semite of the day was Winston Churchill, together with another even bigger anti-Semite in Britain, this Mr. Balfour, Lord Balfour. And because Britain was the most powerful of the empires at the time, the United States of America of those times, with the most powerful navy and army and biggest empire, they listened to Theodor Herzl, and they really liked very much what he said. And what did Churchill say? He said, "What is good for the Jewish people is very good for the British Empire." In such a voice. They knew from the start The Zionists knew. The British, the French, the Germans, everybody knew exactly what this was about. They didn't have such a media in the way that could interpret through your newspapers and radio and television and fables in the schools about a land without people, for a people without a land, people who wanted to stay here. Those Jews didn't want to go there. If they were going to leave Russia or Austria or Britain or France, they wanted to go where? They wanted to go to America. But the Americans and the British and the French and even the South Africans, where my grandparents came, they didn't want too many Jews. And they all liked the idea, let these Jews go to Palestine, because there they will serve the British Empire. And they will build the wall against Asian barbarism. Well, am I telling you history of 125 years ago, or am I telling you the history from 1948 to 1967 to now? You listen to what they say. Today it's America. And it was Clinton and Nixon and Reagan. It was after Suez of 1956 that the Americans were not too happy, so they said, when they saw the French, your neighbors, and the British and Israel taking control of the Suez Canal. They weren't too happy. Why? Because actually after the Second World War, the Americans wanted to take over the empires of the French and the Portuguese and the Belgians and the British, which they've done. So in 1956, they said to the British and the French and Israel, it's not a good idea because people can see this is colonial control. They're unhappy. We've had the war against the fascists. We must honor the independence of Egypt and Ghana and Vietnam and so on. So you better move back, because they wanted the space to take over. And they did in such a big way. These other countries were weakened. Independence was coming to most of the former colonies. The French stuck it out in Vietnam and in Algeria. The Portuguese were very stubborn in Angola, Mozambique. The racist rulers in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, South Africa, apartheid, Namibia, which was under South African control. But as for the rest, the world became independent from India to Ghana and so on. But in the process, of course, the Americans became the big empire of the world. And if you look at the statistics, you look at the figures, you look at the money, what made Israel tiny, small part of the western part of Asia, the place we Europeans call the Near East, because it's our geography. We look at the world geography from the vantage point of London and Berlin. So it's the Near East to them. But this is Western Asia. And the Americans from 1948 have poured into this day, the average is $4 billion US dollars a year. $4 billion US dollars every single year for 70 years. It's more than $250 billion US. Any country in the world, put that into Ghana, put that into Kenya, put that into South Africa, these countries would become incredibly wealthy and prosperous and developed, and maybe like Israel, become the fourth biggest military power in the world, fourth or fifth, with over 200 nuclear weapons. And of course, this is what makes Israel a country which carries out murder and barbarism and war crimes, crimes against humanity, with, as you've already heard from Mary, with impunity. This is what we're up against. This is why when we come to Europe, and whether it's Vienna or whether it's Britain, France, go to the United States, it's so difficult to speak, to get press coverage, to get organizations, to get the countries, the governments, to support United Nations resolutions against Israeli war crimes, against the crimes of ethnic cleansing and incremental genocide with the bombs that are used on Gaza and the guns and the weapons that are used against the people of the West Bank. So Herzl had delivered, and we can see that the process from that time has been one of creating this wall against Asia and really against the rest of the world. And of course, at the time of 1896, he recognized the colonial wealth for Europe, which makes Switzerland and Austria and Britain, Europe, America so prosperous. Didn't even know at that stage about the oil and the gas and the resources, which by the time Uncle Sam, I don't know if you call America here Uncle Sam, if you know the term, the Yankees had come to the height of their power when everybody saw that the Middle East was a lake of oil and the gas resources. At the time that Churchill said, what's good for the Jews is good for the British Empire, he was talking about the control of India and further afield. Oil today is the gold of yesterday, as we well know. So let me quote somebody else for you. There's a leader in our world in 1961. He said that Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state because Israel took the land away from the Arab people after the Arabs had lived there for many, many centuries. This is Dr. Hendrik Verwoerd, the architect of apartheid. And he said this in praise of Israel, not countering Israel. He said it in praise of Israel because he was fed up with the hypocritical British. Because the British, with the Sharpeville massacre, which took place the year before, the 21st of March 1960, Britain and most of the Western countries were condemning South Africa for shooting down black people. They weren't people with guns. They weren't people with suicide vests. They were people who were demonstrating peacefully against the apartheid laws. And Britain, which was South Africa's main trading partner of the time, was talking about this is no good. They meant for their business. And their people, ordinary people like us here, ordinary people, were in the streets protesting. Down with apartheid, racism, massacres, boycott South Africa, and so on. So Britain was speaking up about this apartheid, and Verwoerd said, he said, what's wrong with our apartheid? Why are you condemning us? You love Israel. You support Israel. But Israel, like South Africa, is an apartheid state. It chased the Arabs away. We chased the black people away. Not entirely. Why are you condemning us? Dr. Verwoerd knew better than anybody. He could understand this is apartheid that was created from 1948. Why? It's much worse now, by the way, but even then, in 1947-48, they said this country is for the Jews, not for people who have been here before, who could have been there, as is well known, for centuries and centuries, tilling the fields, creating the artifacts, building towns like Jericho and Jerusalem and so on. Get them out. This is for Jews. And any Jew, like me, anywhere in the world, please come. Wherever you're from, New York, Boston, Johannesburg, London, Moscow, Petersburg, Vienna, wherever. You can come. Doesn't matter, you've never seen the place. You can become a citizen because you're Jewish. But if you're Palestinian, if you're Arab, it doesn't matter that your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents have been living here continuously. Get out. And you can't come back and say you're a refugee, you want to come back. Forget about it. Dr. Verwoerd liked this. He really liked this. This is what he was trying to do in South Africa. And he said, why are you attacking us? That's an apartheid state. If we want to talk about why we say Israel is an apartheid state, and you heard Mary giving you the history, the examples, we can mention what Dr. Verwoerd didn't even know in 1961, that there are now over 50 laws in Israel that affects Palestinian people. Where you live, your municipality, where you can build houses, all the things you're forbidden to do, that if you're Jewish, you can do. Doesn't matter if you're Muslim or Christian or a non-believer. There are plenty of Marxists and socialists who are from the Arab population. Even if you're Druze or Christian Palestinian, you don't have those rights. So there are so many examples, but even worse than what we then saw in South Africa, because Dr. Verwoerd didn't live to see the Six-Day War and the occupation of the West Bank and the way Gaza is now blockaded and the bombs dropping, white phosphorus that burned children's skin, and all the other barbaric forms of repression, which we all can see on your TV sets if you haven't been to Palestine. Television does bring it close to us. So the measures that the Palestinians face are what Archbishop Tutu, when he went there as one of many South Africans who knew what apartheid was and who struggled against it, said, this is worse than what we had in South Africa. It's apartheid, but it's actually worse. So the key thing about an apartheid state is not that it's like South Africa. It does what South Africa did. Because at the United Nations, by 1972, they said apartheid is a crime against humanity. And what is apartheid? They didn't say apartheid is South Africa. They didn't say fascism is Nazi Germany. You say other fascist countries, from Franco to Portugal to Italy and so on, Pinochet. And apartheid can be a system in any country. What it is a legal system. You can have prejudice that operates. You can try and keep the children apart from the schools. You can organize a prejudice against black and brown and yellow people in London and in Vienna and so on. But it's when there's a legal system, when in terms of the law of the society, the law prejudices one group of people for the benefit of another. It's defined that way. It's a system legally based that protects the privilege of a specific group of people against the detriment of another people. This is what it is. So when the Zionists, when the Israelis say it's not apartheid, there are differences. We say, yeah, there are differences. We're not saying it's exactly the same. Apartheid didn't bomb the African townships, as an example. We didn't even have these checkpoints that you see, where women are giving birth and the child, the baby and the woman are dying because they are so long at the checkpoint. There are differences. There were no walls and no fences surrounding the Bantustans in South Africa. I was visiting Arafat, President Arafat, at the Muqtada, his compound in Ramallah, which, if you recall, from 2000, and I think it was 2002, sometime like that, when they bombed it, and he was left in 1 or 2 rooms. And he said to us, a delegation from South Africa, look, we're a Bantustan. And I said to him, you're not a Bantustan. And they got a bit surprised, their eyes were big. What's this white guy saying now? I said, President, in South Africa, the Bantustans were not bombed. The Bantustans had very fine buildings for the Bantustan governments. They even had airports and air service operating. These were places which the apartheid regime wanted to make as window dressing to the rest of the world. Not the case with the occupied territories and especially Gaza. So of course there are big differences. And of course there's a demographic problem or difference in that in South Africa the black people were 80% of the population and the mixed race people were another 10%, the whites were 10%. We know in Israel and with the occupied areas with the Palestinians within Israel, if you count them all together, it's more or less 6 million and 6 million. So there are differences, and apartheid used black labor to create the wealth. In Israel, it's much severer because they don't want them anymore. They don't even want to exploit them in their economy. They rather want their land, and the theft takes place that way. So there are the differences. We don't say, when we say Israel is an apartheid state, we are not saying Israel and South Africa are equal apartheid countries. There are differences. But we're saying, along with the UN resolution, that apartheid is a crime against humanity and that Israel is an apartheid state. For the definition, for the claim, Netanyahu has now said, as Mary pointed out to you, that Israel will be a state of the Jewish people. Not a state of all its people living together. It's very clear that Dr. Verwoerd was correct, what he said in 1961. So let me end by saying, what can we learn from South Africa? Because we well know that South Africa had a hideous form of racial oppression, having dispossessed the black indigenous people of their land and of their rights. And they put that land, 87%, into the hands of the white people. In Israel, it's 93%. And they're very powerful with their resources, their military, the support from the West. But we had a situation where the black people of South Africa could not match the power of the white minority. And the whole world said, white South Africa, 5 million people is a lot. It's almost as many as the German speakers of Switzerland. It's almost more, in fact, than many countries' population. 5 million highly educated people with vast resources of power, military might, and the support of most Western countries. People says it can never change, and they were very surprised that by 1990 they had to release Nelson Mandela and thousands of other political prisoners. They had to decide that to save themselves and the white population, they would negotiate change. We were never out to throw the white people into the sea. We wanted to get to the point to peacefully negotiate. How did we achieve it? And what is to learn from it? And what can be done by people like yourselves? So we said, in the first place, our struggle was a just struggle. A struggle for human rights, a struggle against injustice, a struggle, as the great French Revolution proclaimed, you're all children of the French Revolution of 1789. You're all children. and it said liberty, equality, fraternity. Fraternity is internationalism, the brotherhood, sisterhood, we would say. So our struggle was that, and we were prepared to use various methods. In our case, there was use of armed force. It might not be necessary in every case. We said that the main weapon was the just cause, the moral supremacy over racism, colonialism, apartheid, that we would unite our people in active struggle. And we would seek the support of the international community of nations, the United Nations, and each individual country. But more than those governments, more important, the people of the countries, and put to them our case. And this was the anti-apartheid movement, which developed all over Europe and the Americas and Asia and Africa. And we saw that the international solidarity was a powerful weapon. And what should it do apart from marching in the streets with the placards, Free Mandela, and so on? BDS. It arose in South Africa with the international community to boycott apartheid South Africa, all of its products on sale in the capitals and the towns and the villages of Europe and America and the rest of the world, the grapes, the oranges, the wine, the fruit, and the products, machinery, etc. The divestment and the sanctions were very important. South Africa needed the weapons to keep its people down. It needed the weapons to deal with the countries in the next door states, Angola, Mozambique, and Zimbabwe when it became independent, etc., who were giving support to us. And the divestment was so important in terms of the pension funds, the investment of the churches, of the universities, of city councils, which were going into investment funds and assisting South Africa. Certain elements of the boycott in South Africa became very crucial, such as the religion of South Africans. Religion of South Africans is called rugby and football and cricket, and especially rugby and cricket, the imperialist games from England. And when they couldn't play those games, and they came to these countries such as Australia and New Zealand and Britain, France for the rugby, wherever they went, the games were closed down. That hit them psychologically like you can't imagine. A very good comparison for Israel would be their football, their soccer, their Eurovision singing competition, but much more is academia, because Israel regards its universities, its academia, as the prize. And when we find one university after another taking part in the boycott, you can hear the cries from Tel Aviv and Haifa and these places. It really affects them. So I want to end now, and I could go on quite a degree with how the boycott and the sanctions and the divestment weakened apartheid South Africa, isolated apartheid South Africa. White people, the ones with the money, who could come to the concerts here or come to their banks here in London or wherever, they didn't want to show in the hotels or in the clubs that they were South Africans. They would say, well, yeah, we speak a bit funny, we're Australian. The shame of being from apartheid South Africa was very deep psychologically. But of course, what really hurts is the business. What hurts is the hole in the pocket. And when the banks from 1986 began to feel that they better distance themselves from apartheid South Africa, and it started with Chase Manhattan America, which decided to withdraw from South Africa because African Americans, black Americans, were protesting so volubly that the American firms were amongst the first. Kodak, they pulled out. Chase Manhattan, the biggest trader, Britain. And by the next year or so, Barclays Bank, I'm sure that the Swiss know everything about banking. So the name Barclays you must know. And that was the pride of South Africa's connection with the outside world. I know from apartheid ministers who I had to work with. You know, we had the compromise with Mandela, you know, the change that took place. So many said to me, we were on first name terms, we were in a government together. They said, Ronnie, when Barclays decided to pull out and to roll over, to refuse to roll over the debt and to call in the credit, it was the biggest blow. Cabinet minister saying to me, I woke up that morning and I realized apartheid was going to die. That we'd better, to avoid the Red Revolution, we'll come to terms and negotiate the settlement with Nelson Mandela and the ANC. So I'm ending on a note to challenge you, to ask you for your support, that the Palestinian people have a just struggle. They had what the Vietnamese people have had, what the Algerians in the struggle against the French had, what the South African people had. They've got it in bucket loads. They call it Arabic samud, the determination never to give in. And you see this with Palestinian people 70 years on. Every new generation of kids from the refugee camps, from Gaza, from the West Bank, from Geneva, from London, from South Africa, wherever we meet with Palestinians whose grandparents were chased out in 1948, 1967. They have the key. They'll go back. And we see the march of return in Gaza, from the concentration camp of Gaza to the prison walls, and they prepare to go every Friday, and they will face the snipers that shoot them down, men, women and children. And on the West Bank, the similar courage, that young 16-year-old who stood up to an Israeli soldier, Tamimi, Ihad Tamimi, 15-year-old at the time, to punch him in the face because he was destroying the family home and had shot her cousin in the head. That kind of spirit. And in Israel itself, where the young people and old people, by the way, and women stand up and protest against Israeli apartheid. They have that fighting spirit. And that's what makes the difference. It's not easy, and it could take a long time. But this is the struggle now. This is today's struggle. Yesterday it was the struggle against apartheid South Africa. People said you'll never win, and we won, because our people had the courage and the international community gave the support. And it will happen with the Palestinian people. But you know why you have to support it? Because we all are facing, with the Palestinians, we all facing similar threats to our security, to the future of our children. Whether we are pink, or whether we are brown, or black, or whatever. We are facing the rise again of the plague of fascism. And Europe is seeing this. You are seeing it in your own country. I was shocked in Vienna at the extent to which they would close down BDS and the right of BDS to have me to speak, and that we couldn't in a public place. But we can see the rise of the plague of Adolf Hitler and of Mussolini, and I am not joking. I am not exaggerating. We're having, at the present time in the world, such a danger to the very planet that unless we stand together and we demand an end to injustice, wherever it is, in our streets, in our cities, and in places like Palestine, then we are not paying attention to the millions who died, millions in the Second World War, including 6 million Jews. And in that sense, there are Jews like myself who say that to stand for justice for Palestinians is to learn the lessons of the Holocaust, because freedom and justice is indivisible. It can't be for some of us and not for others. And we must read these lessons now. So when Mary and BDS asked you to help with your funds to cover costs, it's a minor thing, but it's something. I have seen from Britain to Vienna, Germany, wherever we go, there's always the small group of volunteers not being paid, as you said, Mary, from Oman or Dubai or Saudis or wherever. These people do it, we do it for our sense of justice. And we really need to see a huge movement growing in your city of Geneva. It should be the leading area and zone for a free Palestine. And if you get that going, you'll see how it can grow elsewhere, and it'll develop all around the world. So this is why people are prepared to sacrifice, not only Palestinians who are at the forefront of it, but people elsewhere as well. So I'm ending on this note. I'm thankful again for your patience and the time you've given to listen to me. And I would really recommend that you should read more on the subject. I'm not the expert. There are wonderful accounts by Palestinians themselves, by one of their great leaders, Edward Said, who has written tremendous works. There are works by Jewish writers like Ilan Pappé and many others who give you the account of the narrative of what had happened. And to be educated, to be aware, is to ensure that your children are assisted. in understanding what kind of a world this is and how necessary it is, if we are human beings, to stand up and raise our voices. Merci beaucoup.